She is also a master graduate of the Deborah King LifeForce Energy Healing Program. She is here today to show us how to cross over from surviving to thriving. Please welcome Christy.
I was a childless mother and a motherless child. The realization of this paradox in my life brought a near existential crisis. Grief is no stranger to me, and I imagine nearly every person in this room has been touched by loss. Grief can be described as deep sorrow. We grieve a variety of losses in life, to name a few: relationships, jobs, ill health, and death of loved ones. I would like to share my own personal journey with grief and how I learned first to survive and then finally begin to thrive following tremendous losses in my life. I've heard that ages 20 to 30 are supposed to be the time of your life. Instead, I lived what feels like an entire lifetime in those 10 years, filled with chronic stress and grief. When I was 19, I unexpectedly became pregnant in my second year of nursing school. Having grown up in a strict Catholic home and now pregnant out of wedlock, I was full of shame and fear. I was scared of being judged. I was fearful of being a mother when I wasn't sure I was ready, nor sure I even wanted to be a mother. I felt pressured into getting married at a time I wasn't necessarily wanting marriage. Having grown up in a small town with a well-known and respected family involved in the church and community, I placed a certain amount of expectation on myself to atone for my sins. At that point in time, I didn't feel I had a strong enough voice to say I wasn't ready to get married. It wasn't that I didn't love my husband, it's just that at 19 I wasn't ready. I can remember wishing on my wedding day that somebody would stand up and oppose my marriage, because at that point I wasn't able to voice my own truth. When my precious baby boy Gabriel was placed in my arms, I felt my fears and hesitations take a back seat to the wonder I felt at just having brought this miracle into this world. I didn't know it possible to love so deeply, so quickly. I continued going to nursing school while attempting to raise Gabriel. It took a village. I had some of the most amazing friends and family members who went above and beyond the call of duty to help me raise Gabriel and love him as their own. Growing into motherhood wasn't a natural process for me. While I loved Gabriel beyond measure, there was just such a huge part of me that didn't know what I was doing. Gabriel was wise beyond his years. He looked like a little man that strutted around, full of confidence and purpose, no matter where he went. Every time we would arrive at my parents' farm on the weekends, he would trek around to all of the farm equipment in the shops and say hi to the employees working in our factory. He had an ability to bring joy to whomever he crossed. He had eyes full of mischief, and he had a knack for making us laugh. Every morning, I would listen for the sound of his feet hitting the ground as he awoke, running into my room to slather my face in kisses. I can remember more than one occasion finding the light of the fridge shining on the floor, only to see him sitting in the door with half a watermelon in his lap, holding a spoon, and sporting a huge dripping grin. Gabriel loved to spend time at my parents' farm where I had grown up, which was located about 10 miles outside of a small town. On our farm was multiple workshops, a seed cleaning plant, a processing factory, an office, and our home. My parents founded a business in the early 80s, which was built around yellow flowers whose heads turn according to the position of the sun. I used to love walking through our fields of sunflower seeds and drawing happy faces on those soft centers to reveal the sunflower seeds underneath. We were surrounded in sunflowers, both live and decorative, my entire childhood and early adulthood. When Gabriel was 2.5 years old, he decided to go on a noontime adventure on a cold December day. After hours of working with his dad in the workshop, he was asked to go to the house to wash up. Instead of going to the house like his father had asked him, we later found out that he had crossed between the house and the shop with his new friend, best friend, our new puppy Sully. And he had trekked across the field to go check out the newly installed windmill on the water reservoir that supplied our farm. The windmill was to keep the water from freezing. As I stepped out of our office, taking a break from writing my nursing paper, I could hear my dad yelling that there was no water at the back of the yard. I went to go find my husband to ask him why they were looking for water. He told me they couldn't find Gabriel, and Sully had come back soaking wet. In that moment, my intuition came in full force with a knowing I did not want to face. I walked between the house and the shop, and I started running across the field. I saw my mom walking on the road, and I watched her stop dead in her tracks and throw her hands up in the air. And I dropped to my knees in the middle of that field, knowing what she saw. As if in a movie, I watched my husband run faster than I've ever seen and jump into that icy body of water to retrieve our precious Gabriel. I remember doing CPR on his little body, and I remember stopping and stepping back, watching my mom continue. As I recalled the dream that had occurred a few short weeks prior to this incident. In that dream, or rather nightmare, Gabriel had drowned. And the look I saw on his face in that dream was the look I saw in this exact moment. I knew in my heart Gabriel was not coming back to us. Once at the hospital, medical staff worked frantically for 6 hours trying to save our little boy. Our immediate and extended family, my friends, clergy, were all gathered at the hospital crying, hugging, and praying. I can remember the look on the doctor's face when she knew there was nothing more they could do. And they slowly started unhooking all of the tubes and lines. Nothing can prepare you for the feeling when they lay your son's lifeless body in your arms for the last time. I looked at his face in wonder yet again, and I traced it with my finger, etching it into my heart, memorizing every feature and freckle. I cried so many tears. I remember how heavy he felt in my arms. Driving home from the hospital that night, with only the clothes they'd cut off of his body and his favorite stuffed animal between us, the silence was deafening. Arriving at the funeral home the next day with the clothes Gabriel would be laid to rest in, the funeral director took us to him, where he lay on a stainless steel table, clothed in his yellow striped pediatric hospital gown. The director advised us we didn't need to dress him, that his staff would. My husband and I insisted on doing this task. He was our little boy. With so many tears, we lovingly dressed him for the last time. I noticed the water that kept leaking from the corner of his left eye as I continually wiped his now wax-like cheek. I thought it fitting that Gabriel's tears matched my own. I'm still not sure how I made it through the next few months. I was living in a complete state of shock. I was unable to feel much emotion other than occasional anxiety and sadness. I just did what I needed to get through to the next day, like a robot. There was no thought, no joy. I'm still not sure to this day how I finished nursing school. My final semester of university doesn't have any memory attached to it. I was completely numb with shock, a shock that would take years to start dissipating. In the months to follow, there were many well-meaning people who felt their duty to advise me that 80% of couples that lose a child end up in divorce. I was determined at that time that my marriage would not end up being another one of the statistics. I wasn't happy in my marriage at that time, but I did my best to continually bury my feelings. And every time I didn't honor those feelings, I dug myself deeper into that numbness. On the surface, everything looked normal. It appeared I had adjusted well to my new normal, to the outside world. I had a lot of friends tell me how strong I was to survive this loss. What they didn't realize was that I was numb, rigid even. It appeared as though I had my shit together, but in all reality, I felt more like an observer who was looking in on my own life, telling the story as if it had no emotional charge to me personally. And then there were moments where that loss would hit me square in the face. Sometimes I would walk out to the water that had claimed Gabriel's life. I could so easily see his footprints as he walked and where the ice got thinner to the place where he finally fell through. One day I found his hat in the water. I can remember scooping it out and falling to my knees in despair. It seemed at times there was no bottom to the depth of my despair. It brought reality back to me. This wasn't just a terrible nightmare. 5 months after Gabriel's death, I found myself unexpectedly pregnant again. By this time, I had already decided that my marriage would not be strong enough to survive. Instead of voicing that, I yet again pushed down that voice inside of me. I worried during this pregnancy that I wasn't ready to have another child because my grief was so fresh and I was aware I hadn't yet processed it. Would I even possibly be able to love her like I had Gabriel? The day Micah was born and placed in my arms was one of the first days since Gabriel's death I had felt so much love. I cried both tears of happiness and of grief. The road to healing started. During this time, my husband and I struggled through some really difficult times. Emotionally, neither of us were equipped to grieve the loss of this young child. We were children when we brought him into this world, and we were children still when Gabriel left this world. At age 22, we couldn't even begin to imagine how this event would shape the rest of our lives. Gabriel's dad began taking up fishing, hunting, and drinking. It seemed to me he couldn't really stand to be with me. I felt his abandonment day after day, night after night alone. Later, I realized he was just trying to escape his own pain and guilt by numbing himself. Mostly though, I was just numb inside. I was simply going through the motions in life. So many nights I cried myself to sleep because I wouldn't even allow my husband to see how devastated I was. At that time, I chose to build a valley instead of a bridge. And that chasm between us just got wider and wider. 2 babies and 4 years later, I learned my mom had been diagnosed with uterine cancer. She had surgery to remove the cancer, and instead of chemotherapy, she decided to try some juicing and nutritional alternatives. A year later, she had a reoccurrence of cancer. For the next 3 years, Mom fought the battle the best she knew how. My dad and I stood alongside her amidst criticism from our friends and family. It wasn't always easy to agree with her choices because Mom had decided, especially as a nurse, because my mom had decided to do very little medical treatment. In the end, the therapies that I learned about because of her have added a wealth of knowledge to my nursing practice today. And I'm in a select number of nurses at my office who have a working knowledge of numerous alternative cancer treatments. But the biggest lesson in it all was getting myself and my beliefs out of the way, because Mom needed to fight the cancer in the best way she felt possible, not the way my dad or I or anyone else thought she should. That journey with my mom taught me that the only thing that she needed from me was my support and knowing that I was lovingly walking that path with her. Many ask how I walked through that time with her and got myself out of the way just to be there to hold presence and space for her in her process. Holding space for someone means that you are there with your entire presence without control or judgment, sharing their journey to places unknown. If I reflect back, it was Spirit with me all along, helping and guiding. When I look back, I can see the hand of God in my darkest moments. Spirit gave me the strength and the ability to carry through some of those most difficult times. I can remember in the week before my mom passed away that my dad had convinced himself that if he could just get more food into her, she would get stronger and bounce back. Very lovingly, I advised him it would do more harm than good at this point to force her to eat. He looked at me incredulously and said, "So I'm just supposed to give up on her?" With tears in my eyes, I told him there was a big difference between giving up and letting go. Imagine having to surrender that person that you love with everything in your heart. How many of you have had that experience? Later that day, I was laying with Mom in bed holding her hand. She was pretty much in and out of consciousness at that time. She rubbed my cheek in only the way that she could, and she said, "You did it all. You're my best girl." I lovingly told my mom I hadn't done it all, but what I had done, I did with great love for her. That was the last time I heard my mom call me her best girl. She'd called me that from the time I was very young. It reminded me of the countless times she tucked me into bed when I was younger, and she would slather my cheek in kisses while she repeated that phrase. It brought me back to that feeling of safety in my mom's embrace. I still believe that no matter how old we get, we never outgrow our need for our parents. Little did I know after that conversation, she would slowly drift away from us. During the week before she passed away, that veil between earth and the afterlife was thinning. I can remember walking into her room one day and she flipped the blankets. I was going to wash her up and she flipped her blankets off and said, "Okay, boys, it's time to get out." So when I asked Mom who she was talking to, because there was nobody else in the room, she told me that she had been speaking with her brothers. What she didn't realize was that her brothers had passed away years before. I realized in that moment that our loved ones really are there on the other side to welcome us with open arms. I now know for certain that we are not alone when we leave this earth plane. I can imagine that would bring comfort to many to know that. We are truly never alone. I sat by Mom's side on the day that she passed, knowing time was growing short. She hadn't spoken all day. I laid my head on her tummy and I tried to catch her eye. She jolted a bit and said, "Oh, hi." I asked Mom if Gabriel was there with us. She nodded and she slowly pointed her finger to a spot on the wall. So I said to her, "Then go to him. We will be okay. I promise. We love you." At this point, we could hear her breathing becoming more and more labored until the time came that her breathing completely ceased. I remember that moment of complete stillness and reverence. A final tear escaped her left eye. As I wiped that tear from her cheek, there was a huge breath of relief that her suffering was finally over, followed by what I can only describe as violent sobs racking my body with the realization that she was no longer here. As much as you think you are prepared for that moment to come, when it actually comes, you realize you are never ready for that moment to arrive. When Gabriel had died a sudden death, I asked God to never experience that again. I bargained with God that I just wanted time. But in the experience of watching my mom suffer every day for 4 years with uncontrolled pain, that very emotion of grief started long before she passed away and continues to this day. I no longer wish for time because sometimes time feels so cruel, both to the one who is sick and to the ones who are standing by, watching and waiting. As a nurse, I often have conversations with my patients regarding time and its quality versus quantity. I have some patients say they want to live as long as possible, no matter the circumstance. And I have other patients say, I only want to live a short time, as long as my quality of life is preserved. In hindsight, I am so grateful I had that time with my mom because I learned so many life lessons through her journey. So even though time seemed cruel sometimes, I selfishly am glad that I had that time with her to prepare myself and my young family for this upcoming loss, as difficult as it was. The day my mom died was the last day I intended to hang an intravenous medication as a professional nurse. I'd felt my time as a nurse had been served to help Mom navigate our medical system and give her true at-home care. Shortly after she'd passed, I'd gone into my workplace to give up my position. My manager at the time told me that he would keep me on the casual list in case I decided to return. I kindly thanked him but told him that wouldn't be necessary. However, the universe must have been working through him that day, knowing there was going to be some more difficult times ahead. For almost 1.5 years after my mom passed away, I stayed home. I wasn't sure what I was to do with my life from this point forward. In sharing these last months with Mom, I was acutely aware of some of her regrets in her life as we talked about them. I absolutely knew I didn't want to end up in the same position as her, having my regrets somehow manifest as disease at a later point in my life. I had already learned the hard way, life is too short. So after many hours spent in counseling and contemplation, I asked my husband for a separation. This was a heartbreaking decision because although I had so much love for him, I knew I was no longer in love with him. We had literally been through hell together, and it hadn't brought us closer. The space between us felt oceans apart, and I no longer saw any way to build a bridge. Knowing I had to go back to work at this point in time was a hard pill to swallow. But in life, as you know, we do what's necessary. 9 years later, I never would have dreamt that continuing on with nursing would have brought me to the point in my career where I am now assisting patients and their families to prepare for their own deaths. Through my own personal experiences and nursing degree, colleagues now look to me as an expert in end-of-life care. I'm honored to be part of that end-of-life journey with my patients, and it's a sacred path they trust me to walk them through. I sometimes wonder if they sense I can understand it more than they know. It was around the time of my separation that the numbness I had come to accept as my new normal started to lift. It was excruciating emotional pain at times that would bring me to my knees. To begin to feel emotions after years of feeling devoid of them, it felt pretty foreign and almost unsafe. I wondered in those moments if I would ever feel joy again. I wondered how other people could survive this tremendous amount of emotional pain. I think that when we sustain tragedy or trauma, we're only able to process things in small amounts. And I think that if we tried to process that entire trauma at once, it quite literally could kill us. It has been almost 17 years since Gabriel passed away, and there isn't a year that passes that my body doesn't sense that time of year before my mind realizes it. That loss seems to remain on a cellular memory. It's as though my body remembers at that time of year that I literally had to bury a piece of myself. Because Gabriel died in December, it has become a very bittersweet month for me. I've always loved Christmas. I love the twinkling lights, the cozy greenery, the vivid colors, even the snow. Our first Christmas without Gabriel was possibly the most agonizing day. As others were opening their gifts, Gabriel's lay unopened under the tree, along with the realization that he would never be there to celebrate another Christmas. Gabriel was thrilled with the twinkling lights my dad had just decorated our entire farm with leading up to his last Christmas. That year, he had added to his spectacular display just because he wanted to see Gabriel's reaction. So every single time I see those twinkling lights, I'm able to remember that childlike wonder on Gabriel's face as he watched from the living room window in awe, waiting for those pretty lights to turn on. It reminds me of the childlike wonder inside of me. In what areas do I find that wonder? And in what areas have I forgotten it? Remembering childlike wonder is like experiencing joy in its purest form. I'm not sure there's a better remedy to sadness than joy. My mom always had a way of making holidays so special to my family. We would gather, play games, and eat delicious food. After my mom died, finding that special part of holidays became more difficult. My dad was remarried. I was now divorced. Holidays felt like any other day. I grieved for my daughters because I knew they wouldn't experience holidays in the same way I had in the past. I struggled to find the energy to make it through those days without running to my room to cry and want to be alone. Bit by bit, I realized nothing in life would ever be the way it once was. And it would be up to me to choose how I wanted to spend these special days with my daughters moving forward. I close my eyes. I take a deep breath. And then I smile. Some years ago, I attended one of Deborah's workshops in Arizona. I had decided to take in a spa treatment one night. In it, the practitioner would take hot oil and pour it over your forehead. For those of us familiar with the chakra system, they would pour it over your third eye. At this point in my journey, I had been pretty angry with God. I was disappointed he had allowed these events to take place, and I was feeling abandoned. I couldn't have imagined that during that hot oil treatment, God himself would come to me. I told him I thought that he had forgotten about me. And in the most loving response, I heard him say, "My dear child, how could you possibly think I could forget about you?" That experience stuck with me. Sometime later, I went into a Good Friday service. Although I wouldn't necessarily consider myself religious, I've always felt myself connected to the Christ light. Good Friday has always felt like a very sacred day to me, even in my childhood. In the past years on this day, I had gone to church to surrender my burdens at the base of the cross. Although I hadn't really wanted to go to church at this point in time, I appeased my dad's request to accompany him to church that day. I quickly found myself zoning out on the sermon until I heard one word that caught my attention: surrender. As the priest's words began to fall away, I began meditating on that word, surrender. It's a difficult process for me, even though I know that life just gets easier when my resistance leaves. As I felt this shift inside of me, focusing on that simple word surrender, tears started streaming down my face as my anger with God subsided, and in its place, I felt his love pour in. From behind me above, the choir started singing in harmony, "Be still and know that I am." Perfect and divine timing to surrender the burdens I had been carrying. I realized in that moment I had been doing it, trying to do it all alone, instead of surrendering into the arms of the one who knew me the best, laying my fears at Jesus' feet. How does one move forward? How did I survive my grief and move forward to thrive? There is no wrong or right way to grieve. What I have learned is that you just need to be and keep putting one foot in front of the other. Surrender to whatever is. Sometimes I sat in that difficult space, allowing the tears and journaling my emotions. I did years of counseling. I can remember attending a counseling session one day after my mom passed away through our employee assistance program. As I shared my story with the counselor, she literally sat there and cried while I consoled her. Ridiculously, I showed up for a second appointment. And when she saw me, she said, "Oh shit, I forgot to pick up those books on grief counseling." So my word of advice would be to find the counselor that is who's the right fit for your situation. Sometimes going to the mountains for the day or spending time with my friends and family is just what I needed. My friends and family didn't need to do or say anything most of the time. Just their supportive presence is what I needed to make that difference to me. When a loved one's death is fresh, there's so many people that gather all around. But as time goes on, those ones who first gathered start to trickle away as the wound becomes less fresh. Those are the times you need your friends and family to show up. Meditating and attending Deborah's healing workshops became a pivotal point in my journey. Meditation and workshops literally saved my life. I went from feeling numb to feeling that innate joy that is within each of us before life's difficulties sometimes temporarily diminishes that light. In between the numbness and finding my joy, there was a journey of so many ups and downs. Often just when I thought the healing was complete, another layer came up to be healed. When my youngest daughter was about 3, she was in swim lessons. She has always been the most similar to Gabriel, both in physical appearance and in demeanor. She had been terrified to put her head under the water. I'll never forget watching as she got brave enough to dunk her head under. When she surfaced, she looked directly at me with a huge smile and waved. Only it wasn't Annika standing in front of me. It was Gabriel. I did a double take. It's as if he popped in just to say, "Hey Mom, look at me, I'm okay." His head went back under the water and Annika resurfaced. It was so trippy to experience that moment, but it was a huge gift to me as it helped me to surrender some of the grief surrounding Gabriel's death. The relief of knowing he was okay, happy, thriving. Our loved ones want us to live happy, full lives. They don't want to see us suffering from sadness or guilt. The movie Collateral Beauty does an amazing job of highlighting the journey a grieving father makes in the realization of the blessings that happen both because his child lived and died. Of course, it was a journey I could easily relate to. Losing a child is not the natural order of life. I realized I could take those the pain and feelings of abandonment and use them to feed my own despair, or I could take the pain and use it as fuel to see the collateral beauty surrounding my own losses. I could either see tragedy or I could pick out the blessings. What resonates with me from Collateral Beauty is when Howard says, life is about people. At the end of the day, we're here to connect love, time, and death. Now, these 3 things connect every single human being on earth. We long for love. We wish we had more time. And we fear death. In my healing experience, I've learned death is not to fear. It is the separation we fear. But I've realized there is no separation. This journey through grief has been leading me to find my center again. Layer by layer, I continue to peel away the sadness, shame, and guilt. At the center of my grief, I found the one thing I had lost. I found love. And if I look closely, I can see love in each and every moment. There is no separation. Love has no time. We need to live. We need to love. And we need not fear death. Everything is not lost because love remains. And that love surrounds us and is in everything. On what would have been Gabriel's 18th birthday, I was at a workshop in the Redwood Forest. I'd had a substantial spiritual experience during that workshop, and I suddenly felt a strong and deep desire to go lay down in the forest. The moment I laid down and closed my eyes, Gabriel was there. He was swinging in a tree, and when he saw me, he ran and jumped into my arms and gave me the best, biggest hug. I had always envisioned that when our loved ones pass away, that they stay just how they were when they departed. However, Spirit showed me that day that they either advance or retreat to their own prime. I believe that by processing my immense grief and being willing to surrender and let go, that it made it possible for me to connect with my son. If we have all these feelings of sadness and grief in our way, it's like our loved ones can't penetrate that protective wall surrounding our being. I took my lessons from the tragedy and the grief I have experienced, and I put them into working order. What I shared with you was just a part of my story. It helped to shape me and, most importantly, find who I was at my core. I learned I am love. I have prayed on this journey the past few years to become a bridge between my medical, emotional, and spiritual training. Recently, I was walking into the hospital to attend an appointment with one of my patients and their palliative care doctor. I chose to go through a different door than I normally go through. I had no idea that day that I would be walking into a situation where Spirit would allow me to be just the bridge I had asked to be. A mid to late 20-something-year-old man stopped me, asking if I could point him to the detox unit. As I prepared to accompany him on his journey, realizing he couldn't do it alone, I had no idea the sharp turn we were about to make. It was no accident I crossed his path. He quite literally collapsed into my arms and died in them. As I was pinned between him and the wall, I could feel his life force leave his body, and followed by what I could only describe as an electric shock coursing through my own heart. I got some help to lower him down to the ground, and I started CPR. The medical team was able to revive him. He had overdosed, getting one last hit before going to detox. I know he was sent back by Spirit for a big reason, and all I had to do was show up and do what was asked of me. The perfect marriage of my medical and spiritual training, tending to his physical body while allowing Spirit to use my body as a conduit for his spiritual healing. Pretty incredible, isn't it? Some time ago, I committed to Spirit that I would be of complete service whenever needed, and Spirit put me to the test that day. And what a beautiful experience of healing it was, not only for the young man, but also for myself. Spirit has been preparing me through all of my experiences with grief and loss, both for my work as a nurse and as an energy healer. I do this work to be of service, wherever, whenever I am called to do so. All I needed to do was to remember my mission. My deep, heartbreaking grief opened me to once again find the love that I am, so that I can share it with others and spark them to remember their own center, despite their own difficult experiences. You see, tragedy is not who I am, because I choose love over fear. Growing up in the sunflower business we had, my dad had affectionately always called me his little sunflower. I believe, like Spirit, he knew no matter my circumstance, I would live up to that name. And like the sunflower, I would always choose to turn my face to the light. Sunflowers are known to be a symbol of joy, optimism, and love. They symbolize faith for everything that is. Sunflowers are resilient, just like us. Sunflowers, in their infinite wisdom, on cloudy days, turn to each other and share their energy with the other. Just as the sunflowers turn toward each other on the days that they can't see the sun, so should we. Grief was not meant to be a solitary journey. No matter how dark things may seem following a loss, please remember, the deepest dark often brings the greatest light. There are two altars we can bow in front of. One is fear, the other is love. I choose love each and every day. Which do you choose?